Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session where we will be talking about taking your team remote from a legal perspective. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself. My name is Meltem. I'm the head of growth at Deel. I myself am located in Toronto, and Deel is a global compliance and payroll solution that helps businesses hire anyone, anywhere. We are a tech-enabled platform that allows you to hire an engineer in the United States, a visual designer in Mexico, and a sales representative in the UK, all at once in under 5 minutes, and ensure that they get paid on time in the fastest, cheapest, easiest way possible. We are a team of 120 people spread across 26 countries with no headquarters. So we actually practice what we preach. We're not just a group of people, set out of San Francisco building a solution for remote teams while we're all sitting in our same cozy offices. We're spread all over the world. As I mentioned, I'm based out of Toronto, Canada. We have our team across everywhere. And the reason why we don't have any headquarters is actually not an accident, but it's a decision that we've made to ensure that we don't have a central place where key decisions are being made out of, so that people don't feel out of the loop. And we will touch on that a little bit later as we discuss what are the things you need to consider when setting up remote teams. Now let's dive right in. I know we only have 15 minutes, so I want to make sure that this is an information-packed 15 minutes for you. So the first thing that we want to talk about is what to consider when your company is about to make its first remote hire. This is assuming that you have not made any hires outside of your country and you're looking to onboard the first person. So the first thing you need to consider is infrastructure to make sure that you can actually handle this. You need to think about finance and payroll. When we say finance and payroll, are you going to sign on this person in your local currency or in their local currency? How are you going to process their payroll twice monthly or once a month, however frequently that you want to send it through? How are you actually going to process the payroll? What are the benefits that you're going to offer them, or if you onboard them as a full-time employee? And what taxes do you need to withhold for your company and from the employee's perspective if they're in another country? You need to think about that before you actually go ahead and make that hire. Otherwise, it's going to become a huge headache. Next is hiring strategy. Why do you want to hire that person internationally? What roles will you be looking to fill in that region? And where are you going to be posting the job postings? Oftentimes, where you hire your local people, the websites that you put it up on aren't necessarily the websites where you find the best talent internationally. And third is expansion plans. Is this going to be the one and only employee that you hire internationally or in that country? Or are you actually looking to set up more routes there and may potentially bring on a few more people after this person is onboarded? Having answers to these questions before you actually make your first hire makes it easy later on so that you don't have to unravel a mess that you've gotten yourself into. Next up, let's talk about companies that potentially already have a few remote team members, but they're looking to scale. You're looking to onboard maybe your 4th, 5th, or your 100th employee. The first thing you need to consider in that case, now that things are getting a little bit more serious, is the type of employment. Are you going to be onboarding all these people as independent contractors or as full-time employees? This specifically matters when you think about the country's specific labor and tax laws. For example, in France, it's very difficult to convince someone to work for you as an independent contractor and make sure that they're legally considered an independent contractor. So you need to be familiar with the country's specific tax and labor laws to ensure that you're not entering into any areas where you will run into problems with the government or with the individuals. And third is your risk tolerance. You can choose to say, I'm going to write up my own contracts and I'm just going to send it to them over Google Drive, going to get them to send it, and I'm going to pay them through PayPal. That is totally an option that you have. However, in that case, you need to understand what are the risks that you're taking on and what is your risk tolerance as a company. Do you want to say, I'm only hiring 10 people in these 5 countries where laws are relatively relaxed. I don't think I'm going to run into any trouble. And if I do, I'm willing to pay the fine of a few $100,000. That is your risk tolerance, and that's fine. Or are you a company that wants to say, I actually want to make sure that I onboard these people compliantly. I don't want to run into any troubles because whether or not it's going to cost me a lot, I don't want to have to deal with that in the future. Understanding where your risk tolerance is will allow you to set up the best system so that you can actually scale one after another without having to worry about each person onboarding and creating this mess on your back end that your HR, finance, and legal teams are later going to have to get themselves out of. Next up, let's talk about we talked about how do you actually get this set up, but what are some of the most significant barriers to entry that companies oftentimes face? So the first thing that companies think that needs to happen is you need to have a local subsidiary that you need to set up. Now, the answer is yes, you can choose to set up a local subsidiary. You can totally do that. However, you don't actually need to do that anymore. If you want to hire someone as an independent contractor, you obviously don't need a local subsidiary. However, even if you want to onboard someone as a full-time employee, there are employer of record services, Deel is one of them, that will allow you to hire someone as a full-time employee without having to set up a subsidiary in that country. So maybe, 5-10 years ago, setting up a subsidiary was a significant barrier to entry. However, today it just isn't. Second thing you need to consider is operations cost. Whether you choose to set up your subsidiary or work with a solution like Deel, how much is it actually going to cost you? Understanding your cost will either, because oftentimes people think it's going to be too expensive when it's actually not going to be that expensive, or they think it's going to be not at all, no problem, it's not going to cost me any extra, and then it does end up costing them extra. So understanding what kind of costs you need to incur going into it is very important. Some costs could be, if you're setting up a subsidiary, are you going to be paying, legal teams, incorporation documents? How are you going to process their payroll? So understanding what systems you're going to be using. If you're going to use a simpler system like Deel, the cost is simply just the software cost that you pay on a monthly basis. And third is company culture. So I touched on that a little bit in our introduction slide where we talked about, that we were 120 people across 26 countries. When people hear that, they get stressed. They think that this is going to break, this won't work. Some of the things that we make sure that we do is nobody feels left out. There are no centralized places where we make decisions from. Our CEO, COO, CRO, everybody's literally in a different country, even at the moment in a different continent. So we make sure that everybody's looped in on the decisions, and you need to make it so that everybody who's joining the company has enough support. So when they join, there's a written culture that teams go out of their way to make sure that they're included in the conversations, and that you actually set up systems to ensure that creative work can happen and that team bonding can actually happen. Because oftentimes what happens is people say, we need to expand into Europe, we're going to hire people there, and don't really think about how they're going to integrate European team into their local team. And that creates problems around miscommunication, results, growth results not being hit, or simply projects happening completely disconnected from each other. So you need to make it executive level mandate to ensure these people are actually integrated into your company. Next up, what are the things that you want to avoid when thinking about misclassification, and how do you avoid potential fines? So first thing you need to understand is, what's the scope of the role? Is this person going to be a C-level executive for you? Are they going to be a customer support representative for you? Understanding that allows you to make a better decision between onboarding them as an independent contractor versus a full-time employee. Next up is hours worked. A lot of countries say that if this person is working for you 40 hours a week, you cannot call them independent contractors. They are by law your full-time employees. Not every country has that, but that's why it's important to get very familiar with the rules and regulations in each country to know that if you're onboarding someone who's going to work 40 hours a week for you in France, as mentioned, you're probably not going to be able to onboard them as independent contractors, or it will be not advisable to do so. Next up is revenue. Is this role going to be a revenue generating role? Oftentimes, this is one that gets looked over a ton. If it's going to be a revenue generating role and that revenue is technically being generated in a specific country, there might be tax liabilities on your end that you need to consider. So you need to understand those rules specifically as they apply to the country that you're looking to hire in. And if all of these sound, too daunting and you don't want to take that on, well, the good news is there are a lot of partners that can take on all of these risks and take care of all of this for you. When it comes to compliance, benefits, contracts, labor, and tax laws, there are companies like Deel, like us, that are set up that will ensure that all of that is taken care of. So all you need to do is pick your person and say, I want to hire this person by this date. And the companies take care of all of this for you. If you are finding yourself that you're running around in circles and you're not actually able to figure out whether or not you're in misclassification territory, it's probably advisable to reach out to an expert in one of these companies and talk to them. Next up, when should you consider setting up a local subsidiary, and what are the potential drawbacks? Now, early on, we discussed, the fact that you don't have to set up a local subsidiary in most cases. You can just hire people. That's very true. That still stays to this day, that if you want to hire someone in a country, you no longer need a local subsidiary. However, there might be some instances in which you might choose to set up a local subsidiary. The first thing to consider is timing for your company. Are you looking to actually establish major operations in a place? Are you looking to set up potentially a manufacturing plant in a country? Where are you in your journey as a company going internationally that setting up a subsidiary might make sense for you? Permanent establishment risk is another one that you need to consider. And I don't want to go too much into detail on that because that's certainly something that should be discussed with lawyers or with a partner like Deel. But you need to understand your risks of setting up versus not setting up subsidiaries. And then there's a financial benefit aspect of it. Now, I said that it's cheaper to work with Deel to onboard your employees internationally. You don't have to set up a subsidiary. You don't have to work with lawyers. You don't have to get a local payroll person. However, if you're looking to onboard, 700 people in one country, it might make sense for you to actually set up a local subsidiary because you might actually save money in that case by having one payroll person, one lawyer, and one accountant in the region to manage all of that instead of paying the $500 per employee to Deel or another company. So it's definitely up to you. However, usually when companies reach that, where they're hiring over 500, 600, 700 employees in one country, that's when they start looking into setting up local subsidiaries. And then hiring and expansion strategies are the last thing that you need to consider when choosing or not to set up one. Again, are you going to be, potentially maybe you have 100 people in that country right now. Are you going to be onboarding another 500 over the next year? Those are the things that you need to consider for the future of that country to see if you should set up a local subsidiary or not. And this is the last one. We get asked this a ton. Oftentimes, you're a young company, you're growing, and you want to incentivize your new team members with stock options. But how do you issue them globally and fairly? So the first thing is please get expert advice. It depends from country to country so much. For example, in some parts of the United States, when an employee chooses to just exercise their stock options, they need to pay a 25% capital gains tax versus other parts of the world, that's not necessarily the case. So that would make the same stock option that you offer one employee that's in North America versus one potentially somewhere in Europe, they will not be worth the same. So it's very important to talk to experts to understand what are the tax liabilities that come when someone wants to exercise those stock options? At what point do you need to pay up? And what's the actual genuine value left behind for the employees at the end of the day? Next up is communication with your employees. Now, this actually goes even if you're working with your local team members, but oftentimes people will see something like you get 0.2% of the company vested over 4 years with a 1-year cliff. That's a very standard thing that you can see in an employment contract. However, people don't often actually understand what that means, how that changes as your company grows, potentially takes on new investment, how those shares get diluted, what's the difference between, priority share, preferred stock options versus non. So it's really important to have communication, open communication with your employees. At Deel, we host these sessions on a quarterly basis as we have new team members join us. We host this almost like a class and then a QA where we answer all of those questions about stock options. And lastly, you need to consider what are the different types of equity incentives that you can give. Stock options aren't the only way. You can choose to give someone NSOs, ISOs. There's a lot that you can offer them. So with that, I will wrap up the session. If you have any questions, you can always find us at letsdeel.com or reach out to any one of our team members through the chat on our website, book a demo to talk to us, or reach out directly to me at meltem@letsdeel.com. And I believe all of this information will be sent to you after the session is over. We hope that you expand your teams internationally, whether with us or with other people. We care that the world becomes a borderless place where you can just simply hire the best talent in the world, regardless of where they are. So thank you for tuning into this session, and we'd be happy to chat with you more if you have any questions about any of these later. Thank you so much.